Om Namo Narayanaye. Om Namo Narayanaye.
Asmad Gurubhyo Namaha, Asmad Parama Gurubhyo Namaha, Asmad Sarva Gurubhyo Namaha. So today we're starting a book called Sri Vaishnava Brahmans, and it's a very interesting bulletin of the that was published by Madras Government Museum. So let's have a look here. So this is a PDF. If anybody wants this PDF, they can just get in touch with me. It's a very interesting synopsis of the activities of Sri Vaishnava Brahmans. A bulletin of the Madras Government Museum, Chennai used to be called Madras in the old days, edited by the superintendent of Sri Vaishnava Brahmans, the Sri Vaishnava Brahmans, by Diwan Bahadur K. Rangachar, meaning Rangacharya, right, M-A-L-T, late anthropological assistant, Madras Museum. Right, so new series, general section, volume 2, part 2, published by the Commissioner of Museums, Government Museum, Chennai, 600008 is the PIN code for the postal code, and published in 2000. So this PDF was published in 2000, or the book was published in 2000. The actual book, I have a hard copy of it. It's been republished a couple of times. Anyway, so let's skip through and let's see. Originally printed in 1931, the first edition, and reprinted in 2000. It's a very, very nice book. So let's have a look. So, preface. So this is by Dr. R. Kannan, Commissioner of Museums in Chennai. So the Sri Vaishnava Brahmanas form an exclusive group, adopting certain customs based on their belief. They must have come into existence only after the time of the great reformer Ramanujacharya. Okay, so that's his idea, right? Of course, there might be Sri Vaishnava Brahmins even before Ramanuja, because Ramanuja didn't actually start Sri Vaishnavism. It's come all the way from the Supreme Lord, Srimad Narayana, through Lakshmi Devi and Sri Devi, and Vishpaksena through Namalwar, down through Nathamuni, Pundarikaksha, Rama Mishra, to Alavanda, Yamunacharya, and then to Periyanambi and Ramanuja. So there's a history of Sri Vaishnavism even before Ramanuja. So he says, anyway, he's saying that mostly the Vaishnavas who follow Ramanuja are considered as Sri Vaishnavas. So sometimes they call them Ramanuji, sometimes they call them Sri Vaishnavas. And about Sri Vaishnava Brahman, right, and Brahman being the highest of the four castes, or the four classes of people in the Varnashram system, like that. This comes from the Rig Veda. In the Rig Veda, there's a hymn in the 90th Chapter of the 10th Mandala of the Rig Veda. Is a hymn called the Purusha hymn, or the hymn of man, or the hymn of the supreme being, and it's called Purusha Suktam. And in that it says Brahmanosyamakamasid Bahu Rajan Nikitaha Urutarasya Vaishaha Padyam Sudrojaita, gives us how society is divided into four classes, comes from that. There are four types of different people. And in the Bhagavad Gita also, Krishna mentions that there are four types of people. So the top class, or, you know, if we can say the top class, all of the classes are important, just like in the body, the head, the arms, the legs, stomach, they're all important, right? But the intellectual class of personality is called a Brahman. So these Sri Vaishnava Brahmans are people in society who are intellectuals, who are the followers of Ramanuja. Right. A devout Sri Vaishnava Brahman thinks that he should strive his best to obtain moksha, or salvation. Moksha means a liberation or salvation from this material world of birth, death, disease, and old age, which is a cycle that every soul or Atman goes through. So, this is possible only through an acharya or religious teacher, right? So that one should approach an acharya, one should approach a religious teacher or a guru. And by listening, by hearing the knowledge which is passed down through a succession of gurus, called a guru parampara or a sampradayam, right, a tradition of gurus, right, that one will get the traditional knowledge coming from the Supreme Lord, and starting from the Supreme Lord. So this is also mentioned in Bhagavad Gita, and it's understood in all forms of Hinduism. There are teachers who teach and their lineages. of those teachers. So Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, Evam parampara praptam imam rajashayo vidu. I taught this to the sun god, and he taught it to others, and like that. It became a lineage. The knowledge, the spiritual knowledge. So all Sri Vaishnavas believe and revere in the Alwar saints, the Alwar. Here they use ZH or ZH, right, to represent a Tamil letter, which is an L where you fold your tongue back almost to the back of your throat. But it's transliterated here as ZH, okay, ZH. Alwar, the same L as we get in Tamil. Okay, so saints, these alwars, the word alwar means one who dives deep in the devotion of the Lord, into bhakti yoga. Bhakti means devotion. So saints devoted to God Vishnu. So to Sriman Narayana, another name for Sriman Narayana is Vishnu or Vasudeva. Krishna, Rama, Narasimha, he has many forms. Okay, so and acharyas, as they represent the amsas or attributes of God. Now, amsa actually means a part, a portion or a part, amsa, like that. Here, he's translated the word amsa as attributes, right? So, God, there is only God and his attributes, right? This material world, in the philosophy of Ramanuja, the Supreme Lord is everything, Sriman Narayana is everything, and everything else, everything is his attribute, right? Is his attribute. So the souls are his attribute, the world is the universe is his attribute, like that. So here, when we talk about Amsa avatar, there's some other Vaishnava sects that sometimes they say Shaktyavesha avatar, an Avesha avatar, rather than a Purna avatar, rather than exactly equal to God. These are empowered souls or divine personalities or saints who come and who teach the teachings of the thing. We can call them Amsa avatars. Amsa avatars. If we look in the Bhagavad Purana, in the 3rd chapter of the 1st canto, there's a description of many avatars. Avatar means, the word avatar in Sanskrit means avatarati, means one who descends, to descend, right? Avatarati means one who descends. So from the spiritual plane of existence, someone who descends is an avatar, but it may not be the Lord himself fully. It may be an empowered living being like ourselves, but completely pure, a pure soul, like that. So these are called variously. Here they're called Amsa avatars, and in the Alwar is also considered to be certain Amsa avatars or incarnations of certain divine servants of the Lord in Sri Vaikuntham, in Lord Vishnu's heaven. And so the Alwars and the Acharyas, right? There's a difference between Alwars and Acharyas, which we'll get into in the book. But the Acharyas are the teachers in the lineage, but also the Alwars are also there to show us the example of God-intoxicated saints. Okay, they are full of devotion to the Lord. So their great learning and piety, meaning the Alwars and the Acharyas, right, are attributed to the presence of Amsas of God in them, right? So God has, the Supreme Person, Sriman Narayana, has his different associates and servants and consorts and everything, and weapons and paraphernalia in his heaven, in his place, in the spiritual plane. And some of those things are, it's considered that the presence or the energy of those things is manifest in these personalities. So for instance, one of the servants of the Lord is Shesha or Ananta Shesha or Adi Shesha. The word Shesha itself means servant, but Adi Shesha means the first servant, right? So first servant of the Lord is Adi Shesha. He takes the form of the Lord's couch or bed. He takes the form of many different things. In the material world, sometimes he'll take a form where he holds up the universe, figuratively or literally, whatever way you want to think about it. And so he has the potential, therefore, to lift things up. So we can call him Dharana Vesha. Dharana means to lift or to carry, right? So Dharana Vesha. He has the Avesha, he has the power or the Shakti, the potency to be able to lift the universe or something like that. But that is all given by the Lord. Okay, so the presence of the power of God in some way is in these divine personalities, these great saints. Their great learning and piety is attributed to the presence of the amsas of God in them in some way, right? Tirumalasai Alwar. Now we're going to get in talking about specifically the different Alwars. There are 12 Alwars. Some people say there are 10 Alwars, right? But when people say there are 10 Alwars, they're excluding one Alwar that was a lady, the others were all men, and another Alwar who was the servant of the main Alwar, Nam Alwar. He was his devotee, Madhurakavi Alwar, who only prayed to his guru and his teacher and did not pray directly to God. So what they say is, well, there were 10 men who were Alwars who directly prayed to the Lord as manifest in 108 different temples in the universe, in more 106 of them in the South Asia and the Indian subcontinent, 2 of them outside of this world, the Ocean of Milk and Sri Vaikuntha, which is Vishnu's heaven, and so out of those, right? If we add the 2, Madhurakavi Alwar and also the lady Alwar, Goda or Andal, as she's known in Goda Devi in Sanskrit, Andal in Tamil, then we get 12. So we have 12 Alwars. So out of the 12, the number 4 in chronological order is this Tirumalasai Alwar. So we'll learn more about him later. Tirumalasai Alwar explains clearly the concept, the Vaishnava concept of God and his grace, right? So any religion that we look at, any religious sect, when we talk about God being like a person, he has compassion for the living beings. He has compassion for his creation, for all sentient beings, and he expresses that compassion in different ways. So in Sri Vaishnavism, he's saying Tirumalasai Alwar clearly explains this idea of God and his grace like that. Of course, other people in the tradition also explain that too. He's just mentioned that here. It should be thought that Sri Vaishnavas alone worship Vishnu as God, right? It should not be thought, should not be thought that Sri Vaishnavas alone worship Vishnu as God. That's true. There are many other types of Vaishnavas. There are other sampradayas. There is Smarta, he says here, Smarta Brahmans, right? He says here, Shaivites, those who think Shiva as the most important God, right, also adore him as their God. Now, there's a misconception here, right? Some people, here he's talking about 2 different types of people, right? To be specific, Smarta Brahmans follow Advaita Vedanta of Adi Shankaracharya, right? The non-dualist philosophy of the philosopher Shankara from the 7th century or 8th century, right? And he posits that all of these different gods are different manifestations of the same God. All of the different personalities that are worshipped in India are just manifestations of the same God, right? But then there are also other people who are not Smartas, but they can worship Shiva, they can worship Durga, they can worship Ganesh, they can worship Surya, they can worship Vishnu or Subramanya, whatever. But the Shaivites, there are people who are Shaivas, right, who also simply worship Shiva. They worship Shiva more directly, but they also might find a place to worship Vishnu. Similarly, there might be some Vaishnavas who also find a place for the worship of Shiva, but as a lesser deity than Vishnu, as a lesser deity than Sriman Narayana. So, or as his great devotee or something like that. So here seems like what he's saying is that Shaivites and Smarta Brahmins are the same thing. They're not. That's my point. Smartas follow the Advaita Vedanta of Adi Shankaracharya. That's what Smarta means. Smarta actually means a person who follows 100% the Smriti Shastras of India. Now, the Smriti Shastras are also called the Dharma Shastras. Of course, Smritis are anything which are not the Vedas. The Vedas are called Shrutis, that which is heard, and the Smritis, that's that which was remembered, right? Coming from Shruyate, to speak, to hear, and Shmariti, to remember, right? So the Smritis are anything that are not the Shrutis. We can another way of saying this is Agama and Nigama, right? Nigama means the Vedas, the Shruti. Agama means everything that's not the Vedas, right? So these books, the people who are very much attached to following, they might also follow the Vedas, or they do follow the Vedas. They follow the Vedanta, the philosophy of the Upanishads, but they are very, very inclined to follow all the minute rules and regulations given in the Shmiti Shastras, which are mostly like Manusmriti, Yajnavalkya Shmiti, Parashara Shmiti. There are different ones, even some of the Vedic ones like Apastamba, Bodhayana, etc. So, okay, so then they also might adore Lord Vishnu. They also might worship Lord Vishnu, but they have maybe a slightly different concept. The Sri Vaishnavas, they worship Lord Vishnu, and Lord Vishnu is the one and only God for the Sri Vaishnavas. They are Ekanta Sriman Narayana worshippers. Ekanta Vishnu worshippers, Vaishnavas, Ekanta Vaishnavas. That means one purposed, or one, they recognize one supreme God, and that is Sriman Narayana. Whereas the Smartas, they see everything as all the difference, they see everything as supreme. They see just different forms, in different forms. The Shaivites see Shiva as supreme. Yam Shaiva Yam Upasati Shiva iti Brahmeti Vedanti Naha. Right? So there's a sloka that says that some people, they see Shiva as the supreme, like that. So, but actually, they see Shiva as supreme, so they might also worship Vishnu, but they don't worship him as exactly supreme. Maybe they worship him as the devotee of Shiva or something like that. In the same way that some Vaishnavas worship Shiva as the devotee of Vishnu. So, the only difference between them is that the former, right, the Sri Vaishnavas, recognize Vishnu as the only supreme deity and would not acknowledge any others, whereas the latter recognize the Trimurtis. Okay, so what is a Trimurti? Tri means three in Sanskrit, so Murti means forms. So three forms or three deities, right? What he's talking about here is a general concept that people have of Hindus, of what the Western people call people in India Hindus. Actually, in India, people don't call themselves Hindus. They call themselves followers of Sanatana Dharma, means the eternal way, right? Sanatana means eternal. Dharma means our way or process, like that. And so the eternal way, right? Sanatanis, or Sanatana, they call them, we are Sanatanis, or we're followers of Sanatana Dharma. But anyway, everybody in the world, many people call that Hinduism now, general Hinduism, and so it's become equated with the smarta philosophy of the Advaita philosophy or non-dualist philosophy of Shankaracharya, because that is prevalent amongst a lot of Hindus, and the Hindus, very simply, when people are explaining to people around the world what a Hindu believes, is they believe in three gods: Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. The Brahma, the creator, Vishnu, the maintainer or the preserver, and Shiva, the destroyer. Okay, so this is an idea of Trimurtis. Okay, this is a very, very simplistic idea of Vedic religion or Hinduism. Okay, but this is what most people know, and that's about all that most people know. Hopefully, when we read this book, we'll learn a lot more. Okay, so in this work, the author, Divan, right, which is a title, right? He's a Divan. Bahadur is also is somewhat of a title. Is a jati or a type of caste name that has to do with that. He was like a royal assistant or a royal servant or something like that. K. Rangachari, right? And usually the names in South India, that usually there's a letter before the name, the person's name. Rangachari is the person's name, but the letter that comes before him, usually if you extend that out, if you open that up or explain that is his birth village. That'll be the village where he was born. Because we use the names, these names are all names of Vishnu. In South India, people in India tend to like to name their children after different deities. So the Vaishnavas like to name their children after Vishnu or Sriman Narayana, right? Or the girls after Lakshmi or Sri Devi. So then if we have, say we have somebody called Govindadas, right? Govinda is the name of Krishna. So we have somebody called Govindadas, and then we have, because it's a very common name, we might have another person called Govindadas, right? So how do we not confuse those two? Well, one is the M. Govindadas from Madras and B. Govindadas from Bangalore, right? So that's the way that they distinguish people in a culture where a lot of the names are the same. So he is the late, so he's, obviously he's not with us anymore. He was done a long time ago. Anthropological assistant of the museum circa 1930. So he has recorded the customs, ceremonies, traditions of the sect to which he belongs. And it seems like the exact sect that he belongs is the Srivashana Brahmans sect, but this sect is also divided into two or more different classes. And the class that he belonged to is called the Vadagalai, or the Northern School, or the Kanchipuram School of Sri Vaishnavism. There's another major school called the Tengalai, or the Southern School, which is the Sri Rangam School. Okay, but more about that later. That'll be also explained more in the work. This work is not intended as a critical study of Sri Vaishnavas. So it's just he's just giving an anthropological overview of Sri Vaishnava Brahmins, what they do in their daily life and what they believe. He goes into some detail, however, but it's not considered to be a critical study. He's not using the word critical here as criticize, but in critical in the sense of a scholastic examination of all aspects of Sri Vaishnava Brahmins. It's not supposed to be that. If you really want to get into that you have to do more research. But as interpreted by one of their members, so it's him talking about his own tradition, his own customs, his own ceremonies that he and his family members and associates and relatives and relations perform. So to enlighten the tenets of this sect to the world, right? So he's trying to just shine a light on the customs, ceremonies, and traditions of the sect that he belongs to. This republication is intended to prevent the disappearance of excellent anthropological knowledge of this sect, which has played a key role in the political, social, and religious life of South India. Very good. Okay, so now let's get to the actual. So the preface being written here says by the editor. Is he the editor? I don't know. I don't know who the editor is anyway, but the editor has a small preface here. It says, this study of the Sri Vaishnava Brahmins aims at recording the customs of the people with which it deals as they are regarded within the community itself, the community in which the author belongs, and within which he has therefore spent his long life. Outside authorities may disagree with some of his conclusions. So this is like a like a disclaimer almost. But the paper is intended not as a critical study so much as a record of traditions, customs, and ceremonies as understood by those who adhere to them and as interpreted by one of their number, who is also an anthropologist who also studies, customs and human societies. Okay, so here we have the table of contents. This will give us an idea of the overview of the book, right? So we have a preface, then we have introductory remarks, something about Vishnu worship, Vaishnavism in South India, the Alwars, the Acharyas. We already mentioned a little bit about Ramanuja himself, the concept of God as laid down by Ramanuja, the soul and immortality, matter or prakriti, this universe, right? Initiation into Sri Vaishnavism or into Vaishnavism. Then we have a discussion about a little bit about the differences between the Northern School and the Southern School, the Vadagalai Sri Vaishnavas and the Tengalai Sri Vaishnavas, and then a whole lot on the daily observances of Orthodox Sri Vaishnava Brahmins. Remember, this is the Brahmin group, because not the non-Brahmins may not do all of these things. Right, so, but anyway, daily observances, getting up from sleep, evacuation of urine and feces, washing, sipping water, cleaning of the teeth, bathing, putting on Udva Pundram, which is the caste marks or the religious marks of tilak on different parts of the body, offering of water and rice to the Devarshis, so the different seers and forefathers, which is called Devarishi Pitri Tarpanam, right? Morning prayers called Sandhya Vandanam, repetition of the Astaksharam, which is a sacred mantra, Om Namo Narayanaya, with eight letters. Adara Shakti Tarpanam, or offering of water oblations to different personalities in Vaikuntha or even here in this material world. Brahma Yagyam, which is done by all Brahmins, not just Sri Vaishnavas. It's the chanting of some portions of what the Brahman is studying, because a Brahman traditionally has to study. He also has to teach. These are part of the 6 things: yajna, yajna, patana, patana, dana, and pratikriya. These are six traditional duties of a Brahmin that he has to teach. He has to learn. He has to teach. He has to learn specifically the Vedas, teach the Vedas, right? But learn and teach other things as well. He has to perform worship, and he can teach others or perform worship for others, right? So yajna, yajna, patana, patana, dana, and pratik. Patana patana was first, and yajna, yajna second. Then dana and pratikriya has to give in charity. He has to accept charity. Okay, so Upasana Homam, which is done morning and evening, which is a fire ceremony, a fire ritual, which is done by Brahmins, which is actually a Vedic prescription, not followed by a whole lot of people these days. But anyway, Abhigamana Aradhanam, collecting items, for the daily worship of God in the home. Abhigamana Aradhanam means getting ready, taking bath again, and doing noon Sandhyavandanam, prayers at noon or whatever like that, getting ready for the worship of God. And then Upadanam, collecting items that he needs in the daily worship of the God, Madhyana at home. Madhyanika Snanam means the noonday bath. Madhyanika Sandhyavandanam, or noon prayers. The actual Aradhanam, which is called Ija in Sanskrit also, or we can call Puja. Most Hindus call it Puja, right? Or the worship of God in the house. The Vaishvadeva, which is part of the Panchamahayagnas, that as a householder, he should perform these 5 sacrifices every day to repay the debts that he has to 5 different types of living beings, like, by offering them some food also. Panchamahayagya, Vaishvadeva is part of Panchamahayagya. Bhojanam means he sits down, he takes his food. In those days, they used to have 2 meals a day, usually. It was the brunch, sort of a brunch meal, which was not, it was pre-lunch, but it was post-breakfast. We make those into 2 meals mostly today. Swadhyayam means study and perhaps teaching. Sandhyavandanam in the evening at the twilight when the sun goes down. And yogam, or mystical meditation on the Lord until one falls asleep at night. Okay, and so then the next part of the book talks about a subsection of the Vaishnava Brahmins who actually are priests in the temple priests. So those are called archakas. The word archana or archa, the archa means the deity form in the temple, the idol in the temple, or the icon, the holy icon in the temple. And so that's archa. And archana is when we worship that icon, that religious icon. And then the person who does the worship is called an archaka. In general, in India, in North India, they're called pujaris, people who perform the puja. So in South India, normally they're called archakas. So archaka Sri Vaishnava Brahmans. So they're a different class, right? So there'll be discussion of how they differ from the regular Sri Vaishnava Brahmins. Then there'll be an explanation of the special initiation that the temple priests take, which is called the Chakra Mandala Diksha ceremony, which has to do with a mandala, or a mystic diagram, which has a wheel and a lotus in it. So a chakra and an abja, right? Chakra abja. Abja means lotus, chakra means wheel. So then we have the prana pratishta, or the pratishta ceremony of Utsava Vigrahas in temples. What that means is pratishta literally means, the word tishta comes from the verb sta in Sanskrit. Pratishta means to make, to stand. So when you make the icon or the deity or the murti of the Lord stand up on the altar, then to get ready to be worshipped, that is called pratishta, or installation, right, of the deity. So when we install the deity in the temple, when we invoke the life into the deity, when we ask the Supreme Lord to accept our worship through the deity, that is called pratishta. Sometimes it's called Prana Pratishtha. Prana means that life is. So the Prana Pratishtha ceremony, a particular Prana Pratishtha ceremony that happened in the 1930s is going to be described, or in the 1920s. All of this is a snapshot of Sri Vaishnava life in the 1920s and 30s. So of the Utsava Vigraha. So a Vigraha, a Murti, a Pratima, this means a form or an icon, a religious figure in a temple that is being worshipped, right, of the Supreme Lord. And these are bona fide forms. They're not just imaginary forms, they're bona fide forms that are given in the scriptures of the Sri Vaishnavas, right? So the Utsava Vigrahas, Utsava means festival. So there are different types of these forms, right? And one type is the type that can be carried around in procession, can be bathed, is movable. So those movable types are called Utsava Vigrahas, right? In temples. Now in the house, of course, the worship of the Lord, we either have a small Utsava type Vigraha, right? Or we have what is called a Salagrama, which is an ammonite fossil from a particular holy river called the Gandaki River in Nepal, right? Which has a chakra, has the Sudarshana discus of Lord Vishnu, which is famous. Lord Vishnu has this famous discus weapon, and it has the marking of Vishnu on it, like that, naturally. So it's considered to be directly the Supreme Lord Sriman Narayana, right? So many times people worship that as a self-manifest form of Sriman Narayana in the house. Okay, so then we have, in 115, we have the Ankurapanam ceremony. Ankura in Sanskrit means a sprout. Arpanam means to encourage the sprouts, to encourage the growing of sprouts, or to make the sprouts grow, right? So Ankurapanam is a ceremony which is done at the beginning of any long ceremony, any long ritual that takes more than one day, or at least one day, right? At the beginning, we sow different grains and dals and beans like that in some soil and inside the sacrificial arena, and we water them with specific prayers. And when they grow, when they sprout and they grow, we see, according to how they grow, if they grow very nicely, then it's considered to be a very good ritual. And if they don't grow very well, it's considered to be not so good ritual. So like that. So Ankurapanam is like a measuring stick to see how well we've done the ritual, like that. All right. So that is also going to be described. The daily worship in temples according to the Pancharatra system. Okay, so the daily worship in temples is going to be described a little bit. According to the Pancharatra system, the word Pancha means 5, Ratra means night. It refers to a system of worship of the Supreme Lord, Sriman Narayana, that was taught by him and by others, by rishis, by devas, by different people, right? And he famously has taught about 5 different types of knowledge which destroy 5 types of ignorance. That's why 5. Or it was taught over a period of 5 nights to some person, like that. There are many different translations and understandings of what Pancharatra means. Okay, so why specifically they've mentioned here Pancharatra is because there is another way to worship God too. There is another way to worship Sriman Narayana. These are called agamas, right? Ways of worship, right? We can also call them tantras. We can also call them, but not tantra in the modern Western sense of it, which most people, as soon as you say tantra, they think of some sort of sexual, religious sort of, thing. Not like that. It is called a tantra. Tantra means tan triate. Triate means to deliver. Tan means him. So a way of deliverance of the person, a way of worship. A way of worship is a tantra, right? They can also be called samitas. They can also be called agamas. Okay, so agama can be also explained as agama. It can be explained as which was spoken by Shiva to his wife Parvati about Vishnu. So agamas, there are many agamas also. There are Bodha agamas and Jain agamas for Buddhists and Jains. There are Shaiva agamas for Shivites. There are Shakta agamas for those who worship the goddess Devi, right? But there are two Vaishnava agamas. There's the Vaikanasa agama, which is spoken mostly by the sage Vaikanas, who is considered to be an incarnation of the Lord. And there's also the Pancharatra agamas. So this will be talked about, the Pancharatra agamas. Now, in Sri Vaishnavism, there are temples, and some of the temples they worship according to Vaikanasa, and some of them according to Pancharatra. This will all be explained probably a little bit further on. In any case, the Pancharatra system is open to everyone, whereas the Vaikanasa system is strictly only for people who are descendants in the family of the sage Vaikanas, right? So there are some temples like Tirupati, Tirupati, Lord Venkateshwara, where they follow the Vaikanasa system, Alagar Koil, just north of Madurai, some other places. Ramanuja tended to, some people also say that Sri Rangam temple itself, Vatican of Sri Vaishnavism, used to be a Vaikanasa temple until Ramanuja changed it to Pancharatra. Ramanuja actually changed a lot of temples from the system that they were doing of deity worship to Pancharatra. So he did favor Pancharatra. His Param Guru, or his grand guru, Yamunacharya, wrote a book called Agama Pramanya, and a spiritual descendant of his called Vedanta Deshika wrote another book called Pancharatra Raksha. These were specific books to pinpoint and highlight the Pancharatric system as being a better system of worship of Vishnu and more applicable for the present time than the Vaikanasa system. But still, we have a Vaikanasa system in some places. Okay, so according to that system of temple worship, and the worship in the temple, by the way, this section at the end here is about worship in the temple, is different from the worship in the house. Any Sri Vaishnava, any person who's Sri Vaishnava can worship according to the worship in the house, but only the priests, the persons who are specially initiated into the priestly class, right, for the temple priests, they perform the worship in the temple, either Vaikanasa or Pancharatra. So here, it's going to be explained how the Pancharatric priest enters the temple, how he purifies himself to be fit for the worship of God, right, which is a type of bhuta shuddhi, or purifying the body, creating a mental, a different body, or a purified body. That process will be explained. That's a special meditation for the temple priest, right? And the worship of God, the actual worship of the deity in the temple, right? So that'll be explained. Another thing, the very last thing here that he explains is a little bit about the Brahmotsavam. Brahmotsavam is Brahma Utsavam. Utsavam, again, we describe the Utsava Vigrahas as the festival deities, right? Utsava means festival. So there are occasional festivals in temples, different festivals. The Brahmotsavam is the best festival. It's the biggest festival. It's the annual festival of the opening of the temple, and or the start of the worship. And so therefore the Brahmotsavam is a big festival. And part of that Brahmotsavam is the carrying of the deity, the Utsava deity, the festival deities around the temple on different palanquins and different carriers in the form of different servants like Hanuman and Garuda and the elephant and the lion and Yali, which is a mythical creature, and the Lord will be carried on these different conveyances. And also there'll be what's called a car festival, which is probably known by most people as the Rath Yatra or Rathotsava. The Ratha is a wooden car like that, a big cart, and is pulled by the devotees all around the temple with the Lord on top like that. So that is the culmination of the Brahmotsava. So the Brahmotsava will be explained and the car festival will be explained. Then there's an index. Okay, so we have a list of abbreviations here. He's going to mention some of these scriptures in the book, Bhagavad Gita, Brihad Aranyaka Upanishad, which is one of the main or oldest Upanishads. Upanishads being Upanishad, the secret esoteric teachings that we get when we sit close to a person, to the guru who is teaching us the Vedas, or the Vedanta, the end parts of the Vedas, which are the Upanishads. So they have the secret doctrines in them, esoteric doctrines. So Brihad Aranyaka Upanishad, Chandogya Upanishad, Kena Upanishad, and Katha Upanishad. These are all Upanishads. for a list of 108 Upanishads, you can contact me or with the email at the end of the video, or you can just look it up online. And there are many hundreds of Upanishads, but there are 108 Upanishads. A list of them is actually given in one Upanishad. So there's one Upanishad called Muktika Upanishad, which is the number 108th Upanishad in the traditional list. And it lists all the Upanishads. And the Upanishads are specifically from different Vedas, the end of different Vedas. And they give the philosophical conclusion or the Vedanta philosophy of the Vedas. But they do so, they give philosophical doctrine points in different ways. And then it's not really in a step-by-step or chronological way or in a systematic way. So later on, they were systematized by Vedavyasa or Badarayana in his Vedanta Sutras. So he wrote the Vedanta Sutras, and all of the great acharyas, including Ramanuja, have wrote commentaries on the Vedanta Sutras, explaining in a systematic way the philosophy of the Upanishads. Here he's going to explain, he's going to give some quotes from the Upanishads to back up the philosophy of Sri Vaishnavism. Because Sri Vaishnavism is not just a theology of worshipping of Vishnu, but it's actually a philosophy underlying of which is called Vishishta Advaita. So we mentioned the Advaita or the Kevala Advaita, the complete or absolute non-dualism or monism of Adi Shankaracharya. Ramanuja explained against that the Vishishta Advaita or holistic monism or specific monism, how there is some monism, but it's specific and it's not complete. It's not absolute, right? There are things which are dual. For Ramanuja, the souls, the universe, and God are three separate entities, right? And for Shankara, they're not. They're all one entity, and it's only an illusion to think that they're separate, right? So that's the main difference. Is the followers of the Kevala Advaita or Advaita, the Smartas or the followers of Adi Shankaracharya, they think everything is one homogeneous Brahman or spirit, right? Whereas the followers of all the other Vaishnava sects, right, and even some other non-Vaishnava sects, they see distinction between different parts, specifically the souls, the world, and God, like that. Okay, so then he also quotes SBE, Sacred Books of the East, which is a series of books which was done by 19th century Indologists, like that, and also Taittiriya Upanishad, which is another very important Upanishad, and the Vishnu Purana. Vishnu Purana is considered by Sri Vaishnavas to be the crown or the topmost Purana, because it was written by all of the 18 Puranas. There are 18 main Puranas. What does Purana mean? Purana means ancient tales, right? Tales of antiquity, right? Which give philosophical understandings and explain the philosophy, explain more about the philosophy in the Upanishads and the Vedas, right? Give them more explanation. But they are considered Shmriti or Agama as opposed to Shruti or Nigama, which is the Vedas. The Vedas are considered the highest scriptures. The Agamas and the Shmitis and the Puranas are secondary, but they help us to understand everything because they explain more, like that. So the Vishnu Purana was authored by Parashara Maharishi, so the great sage Parashara, right? His son Vedavyasa. All the other 17 Puranas were authored by him. Okay, so that's just an explanation of some of the scriptures that Sri Vaishnavas accept. So let's start. Sri Vaishnava Brahmans, and here's the introduction. Sri Vaishnava Brahmans form now an exclusive group adopting certain customs based on beliefs in which they have implicit faith. But in most of their general ritualistic observances, they do not differ from other groups of Brahmins. Okay, so we should first understand this, that he's going to be talking here about his community, which is the Sri Vaishnava Brahmins. But the Brahmins of the Sri Vaishnava Brahmins and the Smarta Brahmins and the Shaiva Brahmins, or even the Shakta Brahmins, there are different types of Brahmins. But because they're all Brahmins, they have certain general ritualistic observances which they observe in the same ways, right? As a matter of fact, all Brahmins, to whatever section they belong, follow one of the Vedas, right? So the Brahmins are followers of the Vedas. And in the ceremonies they have to perform, they adopt rituals as laid down in the sutras Sutras are books that tell you how to use the Vedas. The Vedas are divided up into 4 types of books. Of course, there's Rig Veda, Yajurveda, Samaveda, and Atharva Veda. These are the names of the Vedas, but of the 4 Vedas. But these Vedas each of those Vedas are divided also into 4 classes of text. They are Samhitas, which are the prayers, the suktas and the different mantras of the Vedas, right? Then we have the Brahmanas, which are descriptive books telling us how to use the prayers in the Vedic fire ritual and the sacrifice, how to worship God with the mantras in the Samhitas. The Brahmanas are meant for the Brahmin priests to read and to understand. The Aranyakas are which are meant for people who are not not householders, right? Not grihastas who are living in the houses, not married people, but people who have retired or have renounced life and have gone to the forest, or they may be great rishis and they're living in the forest, right? So the word Aranya means forest. So the Aranyakas are for those persons. And for the last part of the Vedas is called the Upanishads, which gives the philosophical meaning of all of the Vedic ritual. Okay. So now the sutras also help us, like the Brahmanas, to know how to use the mantras of the Vedas, right? Either the Samhitas, the Aranyakas, the Brahmanas, or the Upanishads. We can use all those mantras, right? The sutras tell us how to perform those, and each family will follow a particular sutra, either Apastamba Sutra, Bodhayana Sutra. These are very common. Yajurveda, Krishna Yajurveda, the black Yajurveda school. There is a white Yajurveda school. There are different schools of that. The Madhyandina, the Kanva amongst them. There's the Rigveda Ashvalayana school. There's so many different schools of the Vedas, and whichever school the Brahmin is coming in, is being born in, he'll follow that school according to the sutra that his family follows. So all the Brahmins, they follow the sutras pertaining to their own particular Vedas, right? This is for Vedic ceremonies, not for ceremonies of their own subsect of Sri Vaishnavas, but general Brahminical Vedic rituals like that. Vedic rituals, when I say Vedic rituals, when I use the word Vedas or Vedic, I'm referring to of the Vedas and not of other books like the Puranas or Agamas or Dharmashastras, okay? Because there's a difference. So there's these type of rituals which are according to the Nigama or the Shruti, and there are other forms which are according to the Shmiti or the Agama. Okay, so these sutras have to do with Vedic rituals. For example, a Sri Vaishnava Brahman and a Vadama Brahman. Okay, so in South India, there are eight different classes of Smarta Brahmins. One of them is called a Vadama, right? If you want to know about the different forms of the Smarta Brahmins, people can also get in touch with me. But a Vadama is a special type of Smarta Brahmin because he worships Lord Vishnu in the same way, in a similar way, let's say, than Sri Vaishnavas. Sri Vaishnavas exclusively worship Lord Vishnu. The Vadama Brahmin is a Smarta, so he might also worship other deities, but his main deity, his Ishtadevata, the deity that he likes the most, or his family likes the most, Ishtadevata, his desired deity, or his Kula Devata, his family deity, is Vishnu, is Sriman Narayana. So the Vadama deity both belong to either Rig Veda or Yajurveda, perform their religious rites according to the Griha Sutras of the Rig Veda or Yajurveda, right? So there will, if you would see a Vadama Brahmin and a Sri Vaishnava Brahmin, if they're both Rig Vedas or they're both Yajurvedis, they would perform their Vedic ceremonies practically the same. Although there is uniformity in essential features of their religious rites, the various sections introduce certain details which necessarily differ from one another as they are based on their religious beliefs. So beyond their Vedic, doing the Vedic rituals exactly the same, for example, a Vadama Brahmin and a Sri Vaishnava Brahmin, let's say they're both Yajurvedis, they're Krishna Yajurvedis, right? They follow the Taittiriya Shaka, the Taittiriya branch of the Krishna Yajurveda. So they both follow the Apastamba Sutra, right? They could follow Bodhayana, whatever. Apastamba is very common. So let's say they both follow the Apastamba Sutra. So their wedding ceremonies in their community will be almost exactly the same. However, the Sri Vaishnava Brahmin, as in his wedding ceremony, he will add certain things which are only common to Sri Vaishnavas. not specifically Vedic things, but non-Vedic things. Like, for example, at the end of the wedding, they sing Vanaramayiram, which is a part of Natya Tirumoli, which is a Tamil prayer of Andal, one of the Tamil saints, right? To get the Supreme Lord Srimanarayana as her husband. She wants to marry Lord Ranganatha, like that. So she has composed a poem where she speaks about her marriage to Lord Ranganatha. So in the marriage ceremony of Vadamas, Smartas, and in the marriage ceremony of Sri Vaishnavas, in both Vedic marriages, the bride and groom are considered on that day. They are worshipped just like they are Lakshmi Narayana, just like the bride and groom are considered to be just like Lakshmi Narayana. But only in the Sri Vaishnava version of the wedding, at the end, they will chant these songs in Tamil from Andal. Okay, so that's just an example. Okay, so another, although there's uniformity in the essential features of their religious rites, the various sections introduce certain details, it's a detail, which necessarily differ from one another based on their religious beliefs. Okay, so theologically a little different, philosophically different, but they're according to their Vedic sutra and their Vedic branch and their Veda, they're the same. So the Sri Vaishnavas as a distinct sect or a separate class, more or less, in the present form, must have come into existence only after the time of the great reformer Ramanujacharya. Okay, so there were Sri Vaishnavas basically before Ramanuja, like that, but Ramanuja really systematized the whole sect, the whole cult, and got it to where people started to call them Ramanujites or Sri Vaishnavas. But according to the traditional account, there seems to have been a separate existence of this group since the time of Natha Munigal. Now, if we can see his name as Natha Muni or Natha Munikal or Natha Munigal. In Tamil, when we put gal or kal at the end, it's just a plural ending, which is honorific. It just shows honor to Natha Muni. So the person's name is Natha Muni, we call him Natha Munigal. If the person's name is Manavala Muni, we call him Manavala Muni Gal, like that. So this is just an honorific. So Natha Muni was the first Acharya in the Sri Vaishnava lineage, the first Acharya. After the Alwars, after Nam Alwar, right? After the Alwars, the first Acharya was Natha Muni. So he's saying here that basically we can look and we can trace Sri Vaishnava Acharyas back to, or Sri Vaishnavas back to Natha Muni. If we can consider the Alwars also as Sri Vaishnavas too, right? Basically. So further, there is a belief that amongst several Sri Vaishnava communities, that the Sri Vaishnava Brahmans existed as a separate class from very early times, almost suggesting that they constitute a very distinct class, quite different from other sections of Brahmins. So some people might think like that. A careful scrutiny of Vaishnava traditional account at once disproves this claim. It is quite possible that amongst Brahmins, several that have the belief in Vaishnavism, but such would not have completely seceded from the Smarta Brahmin as a distinct class. So the author's idea at this time, his idea is that Sri Vaishnavas were never, were in really ancient times, before the Alwars or whatever, they were Brahmins, and they worshipped Vishnu just like the Vadama Brahmins, like that. But then later on, they became considered to be a separate sect. In Tamil, a Tamil Brahmin is called an Iyer. A Tamil Sri Vaishnava Brahmin is called an Iyengar. These are considered separate communities, right? So, but in general, the word for Brahmin in Tamil is Iyer. So sometimes you can call a Sri Vaishnava as an Iyer, Sri Vaishnava Brahmin as an Iyer. But strictly speaking, he's an Iyengar. The word Iyengar comes from the Tamil Ainda. Ainda means 5. And it means a person who's gone through 5 particular rituals of initiation and become a member of the Sri Vaishnava community. Now, not just Brahmins, but even the other castes, the Kshatriyas, the Vaishyas, the Sudras, the other classes of society also go through that same ritual. So they can also, strictly speaking, they could also be called Iyengars, but they're not, even though they're not Brahmins. So somehow or other, Iyengar and Sri Vaishnava Brahmin has become synonymous, right? So a few families may have seceded or come out from the Smarta Brahmin sect. This is his idea, from their own section on account of their belief in Vaishnavism. Some of the chief acharyas or religious teachers of the Sri Vaishnavas appear to have been Vaisnava Brahmins by birth, according to their own tradition. So there's one tradition that says that Ramanuja's father, that Govinda, who is Ramanuja's cousin, his father, that these people's fathers were actually Vaisnava Brahmins. There's one tradition like that says that they were Vaisnava Smartas, like that. It's possible. It's possible. But we don't know for sure exactly. So one Govinda Acharya, who accompanied Yadava Prakash and Ramanuja to Benares. Okay, so Govinda, this is Govinda, who later on became one of Ramanuja's successors, right? He was Ramanuja's cousin, related to Ramanuja, and he accompanied Yadava Prakash and Ramanuja to Benares. So Yadava Prakash was the Gurukul teacher of Ramanuja. So Ramanuja went to a traditional Sanskrit school. He learned Sanskrit and he learned the Vedas. He learned the Upanishads under a person called Yadava Prakash. Yadava Prakash was a follower of a different school of Vedanta than Ramanuja. He was a follower of the Beta school, and a particular type of Beta. There's several different types of Beta. The word Beta means difference. Abheda means oneness. So Beta means difference and oneness. Beta at the same time. So that has to be explained, right? How you can have difference and oneness at the same time. But there are philosophies like this. So Beta Vad. Vad means to speak or to say. When we say Vad, it means a philosophy. So Beta Vad, the philosophy of difference and simultaneous difference and non-difference, was there also at the time of Ramanuja, right? So there was a person called there was a person called Bhaskara. There was a person called Bhaskara, a philosopher called Bhaskara, who had a type of Beta. And then there was this person, Yadava Prakash, who had a type of Beta. Bhaskara and Yadava Prakash have slight differences in their idea of Beta. And then later on, we have Nimbarka, who had Swabhavika Beta. And of course, we have the Gaudiya Vaishnavas following after Chaitanya with Baladev's Achintya Beta, right? And Jiva Goswami and Baladev's Achintya Beta. So there's different schools of Beta, right? And but this type of Beta was more towards the impersonal type, whereas the type of Nimbarka and the Gaudiyas is more towards the personal type. So when you have difference and non-difference, you can emphasize the difference or you can emphasize the oneness, right? So these people, Bhaskara and Yadava Prakash, they were more emphasizing the oneness of the world, the souls, and God. And later on, Nimbarka and the Chaitanya Gaudiyas, right? They were emphasizing more of the difference and less of the oneness, but also accepting some oneness in some levels. Okay, so it talks about different schools of philosophy there. Yeah. Okay, so Yadava Prakash, he was a Beta Vadin, right? So Ramanuja actually didn't agree with him. So he was in a Gurukula, he was in a school. His teacher was teaching a particular type of philosophy or interpretation of the Upanishads, and Ramanuja didn't like it. So therefore, he proposed his own explanations for the scriptural texts that Yadava Prakash was teaching. And Yadava Prakash actually felt quite threatened by that because he could see that Ramanuja's explanation was better than his. So he decided that he would kill Ramanuja, right? He didn't want him to grow up and to have his own school of philosophy because it seemed like his philosophy was better than Yadava Prakash's. So he hatched this plan to kill Ramanuja. So he took the whole class on a class excursion up to the North India, to Benares, to the river Ganges. He thought he would drown Ramanuja in the Ganges in North India like that. So they all went to North India like that. But Govinda, his cousin, was also a disciple, and he understood, some of the boys also understood that Yadava Prakash wanted to kill Ramanuja. So they understood the plan. So Govinda, being his cousin, told him of the plan and he escaped. So Ramanuja escaped. So Govinda, Yadava Prakash, all the other boys in the Gurukul, and Ramanuja, they all went to go to North India, right? So that Govinda right? Later on, he became a Shaivite Brahmin because he bathed in the river Narmada and he found a Shiva Lingam, a self-manifest Shiva Lingam. There's a sacred river in India called the Narmada, and many of the stones in there are Shiva Lingams, self-manifest Shiva Lingams, just like the stones, the Shalagram stones that I explained are in the Gandaki River in Nepal are Shalagram Shilas. The stones are self-manifest Vishnu deities. So this Yadav Prakash and his boys and Govinda, when they bathed in the Narmada River on the way back, I think Govinda found a Shiva Lingam and he decided to become a Shaivite at that point. Of course, later on, he was converted back to being a Vaishnava by Ramanuja and given sannyas by Ramanuja. So it says here, later on, he was again converted to Sri Vaishnava Brahman, right, by Ramanuja. So his cousin. Yadav Prakash Smarta Advaitin. Okay, so now here, he gets it a little bit wrong. He says that Yadav Prakash was an Advaitin, right? Actually, Yadav Prakash was a Beta Vadin. But we can say an Advaitin because Advaita means impersonalism, and he had a type of philosophy that tended towards the impersonal side. It was personalism, it was difference and non-difference, but it tended to downplay the difference and to emphasize the oneness. So it was more of an impersonal philosophy. So here he calls him an Advaitin, Smarta Advaitin, under whom Ramanuja began to study, became later in his career a Sri Vaishnava. Yadav Prakash also was converted later on and given sannyas by Ramanuja. And he actually wrote a book called Yati Dhamma Samuchaya about the rules of Sri Vaishnava sannyas. So, under whom Ramanuja began study, became later in his career a Sri Vaishnava and true disciple of Ramanuja. Some say that even the great Ramanuja, the upholder of Sri Vaishnavism, was born of Smarta parents. That's what I said. There are some people who say that his parents were Smarta Brahmins. But as we see, just being a Smarta Brahmin doesn't mean that they weren't worshippers of the Supreme Lord Srimanarayana, like the Vaisnava Brahmins. So, it is clear from observation and traditional accounts that there was not much distinction observed between Smarta Brahmins and Sri Vaishnavas until the time of Ramanuja. So basically, he says maybe they weren't separate or they weren't differences. It wasn't very apparent. There were people who worshipped Vishnu before Ramanuja, like that. But maybe they didn't call themselves as different communities because they all Brahmins, they all follow the same Vedas, they all follow the same sutras. So there wasn't really a big distinction. Okay? So the Sri Vaishnava Brahmins always sought as their teachers for Vedic study either Sri Vaishnava Brahmins or Smarta Brahmins indiscriminately. So when we're going to study the Vedas, if we're going to study the chanting of the Vedas or we're going to study the Upanishads or something like that, we can go to any Brahmin who knows the subject matter and we can learn, right? And so this was the system from ancient times. But after Ramanuja, the Sri Vaishnavas decided that they wanted to learn exclusively from other Vaishnavas. So in the absence of priests or Purohits amongst Sri Vaishnavas, Smarta Brahmins are usually called in to assist them in the performance of rites and ceremonies. This is a very important point. I performed a ritualistic, Pancharatra ritualistic ceremony in Sydney, Australia, which is my hometown, many years ago, moving one temple from one place to another place and reinstalling the deity. And I had a friend there who was a Pancharatric priest. I had another friend who was a Pancharatric priest, and I had another friend who was a Vaishnava. And then the fourth person that we engaged, he was a Smarta Brahmin, but he was a Vaisnava Smarta. So he was also a worshipper of Lord Vishnu. So when you can't find, this is still in vogue, if Sri Vaishnavas, they can't find enough priests to perform a ritual, enough Brahmins to perform a ritual, a Vishnu worship ritual, they'll always prefer to get a Vaisnava Smarta, a Vaisnava Brahmin, Smarta Brahmin, because they worship Lord Vishnu anyway. They're Vishnu worshippers. Okay, so the distinct teachings of Ramanuja must have certainly helped the Sri Vaishnavas to form a distinct class by themselves, and probably the ranks of this exclusive group swelled from frequent additions from amongst Smarta Brahmins. Right, so the Smarta Brahmins would regularly be converted to become Sri Vaishnavas. It's very easy to be converted to be a Sri Vaishnava if you're a smarta Vadama, because you're already worshipping Sriman Narayana. So you just have to change a little bit of your understanding from being a little bit more monistic, a little bit more impersonal, to being a little bit more personal. That's it, like that. From being a follower of Advaita or Kevala Advaita to being a follower of Vishishta Advaita, right? So it's not too difficult to change people from Vadama Smartas into Sri Vaishnavas. The accretion, right, of members, which began in Ramanuja's time, still continues still. And even now it's possible to trace close relations between Smarta and Vaishnavas in certain families. There are some families, though few, among Sri Vaishnavas whose members can observe pollution at the birth or death of a member of a certain Smarta families which belong to the same Gotra, the same Brahminical lineage as their own. No doubt such cases are becoming rare, and probably no cases will easily be found of this kind after a few years. The Sri Vaishnavas of some villages, such as, for example, Valavanur, Savalai, Herangiur in South Arcot district, which is in Tamil Nadu, and Pradur, Tenkulur, Panapakam, and Chetty Maniam in Chengalput district, which is between Sri Rangam and Madras or Chennai, are considered not equal in status to some Orthodox Sri Vaishnava families. Those who claim some superiority, such as the Tatachars, Chakravartis, and Navalpakatars, right, do not have any marital relationship with Sri Vaishnavas of these villages, even though the latter are undoubtedly Sri Vaishnavas. So there's some hierarchy in different types of Sri Vaishnavas also, and no intermarriage was common between some of those groups. A good example of Smartas becoming Vaishnavas is afforded by Tumagunta. The Tumagunta, Dravidas or South Indians, some of them have become Vaishnavas, but still take girls in marriage for their wives from Smarta families. They do not, however, give in marriage the girls born in their families to Smarta families. So there's a one-way drift from the Smarta to the Vaishnava there. Like that. The Smarta Brahmins living in Essanur wear dress and caste marks of Sri Vaishnavas, but their women dress like Smarta ladies. There's a difference in the way that women, Sri Vaishnava women, and even Wadagalais and Tengalais amongst the Brahmins dress, and observe other customs usual amongst Smarta Brahmins. In this connection, we may also mention the Mukaniyars and Soliyars, amongst whom there are both Smarta and Vaishnava families related to one another. It should not be thought that Vishnu is worshipped as a god only by Sri Vaishnavas. Even Smarta Brahmins adore Vishnu as their god. The only difference between the Vaishnavas and Smartas in this matter is that the former recognize Vishnu as the only supreme deity and would not acknowledge any other as such, whereas the latter, the Smartas, recognize the Trimurtis, Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, the creator, the maintainer, and the destroyer, as God's manifestations, some giving prominence to Shiva and others giving prominence to Vishnu.
Om Namo Narayana.